Hello and welcome to another episode of Right Now. My name is Zachary Steele and I am the founder and executive director of Broadleaf Writers in Atlanta, Georgia. Despite the ongoing stay-at-home life we're all living, we're trying to keep some programming going for you to offer some distraction as well as some useful insight on the craft of writing and the publishing industry. After all, we want your work to be published and there's no better time to write than right now. On today's program, we'll be chatting with author and literary agent Caroline George. Hello, Caroline.
Hi, Zach.
It's a marvel. I'm learning how to use technology properly. How are you doing?
I am doing great. I'm getting used to the whole staying at home thing. I make jokes that I'm not sure how I'm going to get back into society after this. Might even have to go join the Amish because I'm living my little simple life of walks and writing and drinking a lot of tea and coffee. So
you know the Amish don't use Instagram, right?
Yeah, I think my platform would dip drastically if I had to be Amish, but
just a touch, yeah.
Just a little bit.
But speaking of staying at home during this time, and I have to divide your questions because you are a multi-platform kind of person, digging the modern life, being a literary agent and an author, and I want to treat both of them equally here, but let's just cover both of them here with
sure.
How is this affecting your life as an agent, and how is it affecting your life as a writer?
Whew. Well, my personal boundaries when it comes to work and life have kind of gone out the window. I made the joke a lot of times that books were my life, but now they definitely are my life. Don't really have a personal life anymore, but that's okay. If I'm not working with my clients and I'm writing or I'm reading, so I might be a little bit crazy after all this, spending a ton of time with my characters and virtual people. But other than that, not much has changed. It's just become more of a challenge to try to set aside time to do nothing or to go for walks or to hang out with family or, do those other things that usually having some kind of free time or having the ability to go somewhere would allow me to have that boundary. But that's pretty much been the biggest challenge.
Well, and again, I don't know how you divide your day normally, but when you're doing your agenting thing, what kind of things are you hearing from editors you may talk to about the schedule of releases and what they're anticipating, not just right now, but maybe over the next 6 months?
Yeah. Well, when when the virus first kind of became a big issue, a lot of publishers were kind of starting to freak out a little bit. Agents were freaking out because we thought that acquisitions would slow down. But surprisingly, the book industry hasn't faced a tremendous decline. Publishing houses are still acquiring books. The biggest issue we've seen when it comes to releases, a lot of release dates have been pushed just because some printing is being done overseas. And so getting those books over here has definitely been a challenge. And so publishing houses are still acquiring books. Every single day presents new challenges, so we're not sure how things are going to play out within the next month or so. But overall, the book industry still seems to be doing pretty well. I even know with editors who I know, a lot of them are just working from home. So the dynamic has changed, but there hasn't been a tremendous decline just from what my agency has seen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we've done with these episodes right now is we've reached out to our own writing community, we're letting them know we were going to have some conversations with literary agents because you may be aware that writers tend to have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And so I've just kind of been passing along some of these questions. The first one, if we start with query letters, is
Sure.
This being one of the query letter synopses being one of the more intimidating things that writers have to face. What is the most common mistake you see with query letters?
Yeah. Query letters, I think there's a lot of misperceptions surrounding them. A query is pretty much a pitch letter. And so one of the biggest mistakes I see that authors make is they aren't professional. They will grovel or they'll do too much research and kind of be creepy in that way, or saying like, oh, I saw that post you posted when you were in middle school, things like that. Also phrases like, oh, God told me you were the agent for me, things like that. It's a big turnoff for agents. Queries, because publishing is so subjective, everyone's going to have a different perspective on queries, what they know works. I come from a PR background, so there are some key things I look for in queries. I want to know that the author understands their market, they understand who their target audience is. And so some of the key things I look for in a query, now granted, what I'm about to say, they don't have to be in this order, but just having these elements is just so helpful for agents to just go and get that information right off the bat. One of my favorite query templates that I've seen opens with a brief introduction. The author will state the title, genre, word count, and some comparable titles. And that just lets me as agent understand where the book fits in the market. Lets me know the book, there is a place in the market right now for that book. Also, this comp title should be within 3 to 5 years old, so relatively new. And then from there, a paragraph blurb to 2 paragraphs about the book. And this is just like a back cover blurb, so it should highlight the stakes. It should kind of show the plot, kind of the character, the why I should want to read this book, and then end with a paragraph that just kind of gives a brief bio about the writer. And again, a lot of different people will have different ideas of what a query should look like, but just having those elements, being straightforward, avoiding gimmicks, just really lets the agent know that the author's ready to not just view their work as being art, but to see their work as a product. But yes, back to the original question, I think the biggest mistake is just authors not treating queries as a professional pitch letter.
Okay. You touched on something there with comp titles, yeah. And that's another area that, I mean, a lot of this is subjective. Yeah. Comp titles probably seems to be one that is less subjective, but it sounds to me like you are a proponent of comp titles in a query letter.
Yes, I am a fan of comp titles. I think a comp title, it sets an expectation. So if someone says that a book is a mashup, which I think they're like Jurassic Park meets the Titanic. I mean, that's kind of a funny little mashup. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, okay, what would this look like? So it kind of starts setting an expectation.
I'm going to make a note to write that later.
I know, that just popped in my head. So if someone wants to try to write that, I'd be really curious just to see how that all plays out. But regardless, a comp title, kind of those mashup titles, just sets an expectation. If someone says, oh, my book is Twilight meets something, please don't write anything with Twilight. But I just thought of that because Stephanie Meyer's released her like Edward Cullen book like the other day. So
I'll cut this part later.
Oh yeah, just totally cut this part. Totally cut it. But I think a good comp title, it does set an expectation. It pinpoints a place in the market. So I mean, not all authors have to use a comp title. It just doesn't hurt, especially if they're listing books that have been published recently. It just lets the agent or even the editor know that that writer has done their research and understands what's being currently published.
Right. I've had some agents who have told me that they prefer that you don't use best-selling kind of titles just because it almost places an unnecessary expectation on it. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that to an extent. I mean, if the book is truly a best-selling book meets something, I don't really see the harm in using it, but you don't want to use best-selling books just for the sake of them being bestsellers. I think even when working with proposals, a lot of times I'll tell my clients, hey, okay, look for some comp titles that have sold really well, and then look for some that are closer matches to yours that might not have sold as well, just to get a variety so it doesn't look like we're just naming best-selling books. So it's subjective. Publishing isn't black or white. It kind of functions in this kind of gray area. What works for one person might not work for the next person, which is what makes it so frustrating. But yeah, I would agree with that, to not use all best-selling books because most likely, I mean, you don't really always want to be the next so-and-so. You know, you want to be, as a writer, you kind of want to make a name for yourself. So right. I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Would you recommend any kind of resources for writers to look into, whether it be online or book, to help them with query letters?
Yeah, I will say there's a lot of information online. Look at when things have been published, because some information that's been published about queries, if it's over a certain many years old, it's kind of outdated. So when it comes to resources, I would recommend that writers go to conferences, that they hear from agents, they hear from editors. Even if an author is not ready to start pitching their book, to still make those appointments and just ask questions. I think in publishing, that's one of the biggest issues, is a lot of writers feel like there's this veil of mystery over publishing. They feel like they're supposed to know things And if they don't know them, that means they're not a great writer and they're afraid to ask those questions. And so I think that taking those steps and actually talking to agents, actually talking to editors, asking those questions is so important. I mean, even when someone emails me and just said and asks, okay, if they have a question about queries, I don't mind answering. Now, granted, if it's a busy day, it might take me a while to get back. There's also a lot of literary agencies that have information about writing a query on their website. And so just doing that research, go directly to the source. And I think that's one of the best ways to educate yourself now on kind of what the trends are in queries and what people are actually looking for.
Yeah, and piggybacking on your conference comment there, I mean, obviously we run a conference and you were there last year, you remember, and a conversation I had with you and a few of the other agents kind of led to something we're doing this year, which is in addition to the pitch sessions, we've created these mentoring sessions, which are a great opportunity for a writer to sit down and have 10 minutes of full time where you just ask your questions. And
that's amazing.
Whether it's at our conference or any other conference, I would echo that and highly recommend that writers look into those and take advantage of those opportunities, because you've got an opportunity to ask a question. You may as well.
Yeah.
So one other element of query letters is word count. Obviously, word count is an element of writing in general, but when you're pitching your book, you have to be able to put in the word count in there. Now, where do you fall in terms of a sort of standardized word count for genres? Would you prefer a writer stick to a sort of expected word count, or just write what you need to write and then we'll worry about the word count later?
Personally, I mean, I come from a PR background. I worked for HarperCollins for a little while before I moved into working as a literary agent. So I've seen the business side of things. Before I had those jobs, I thought that genres had word counts just kind of, they were like the friendly suggestion. You know, you're supposed to hit these word counts. But being in-house, I see that one of the reasons why the publishers recommend certain word counts for different genres, it isn't just about readers' attention, but it's about cost per unit, because the bigger the book, the more expensive it is to print. So publishers keep that in mind when they're looking at submissions to see, okay, are we going to have, does this book, will it cater to its readership? Is it big enough that's going to, or small enough that's going to cater to the readership? But also, can we print it at a good cost that we can have a return? So keeping that in mind, I think it is important to write a book that fits the word count expectations for a genre. For example, a novel needs to be no less than 50,000 words. And I'd recommend that it doesn't go over 100,000 words unless that's for science fiction or fantasy. And even then, you still want to stay around 100,000 words, because then it just starts getting really expensive. I've had people pitch 400,000 word books to me, which it's hard, because even if that book was really good, I couldn't place it somewhere because it would be too expensive to print.
Right.
And fewer people would be more likely to pick up the book, but they're going to, have to haul around for a while. Yeah. And so I think a really great resource, Writer Digest, has a lot of, like, just on their website, information about kind of the word count projected, what word count should be for each genre. But yes, if someone's pitching a novel, it really should be between 50 and 100,000 words. A little bit grace for those more high concept books. Nonfiction should be around between 50,000 to,
That's a big one. That's a big one.
No.
Like even Tolkien would shake at that one.
Yeah, that'd be horrible. To 70,000. And with nonfiction, it can be a little bit less than that, just depending on the project. But yes, I would say do some research there and try to stick to the word count for that genre.
Okay. And let's shift to editing.
Sure.
Obviously, with all of this, you have the unique perspective of seeing it from both the writer and the agent side. But as an agent, when you've signed somebody, do you tend to want the book to be in a more finished state? Or are you willing to go through more edits with a book if you just believe in it? I guess the general question I'm going to ask here is, what is the average number of times you will go through edits with a writer before you're ready to submit it to editors?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When it comes to agenting, every single agent's different. I'm not an editorial agent, so I don't do line edits, deep content edits for every single project I work on. When I'm looking for books, I'm hoping them to be as close to being ready to shop as possible. And so I like a manuscript to be clean. I do work with the author to really polish their proposal. I do a deep edit on the first chapter and then give some general content edits. But it does boil down to if I believe in that project. If I find a project that I just am in love with, I'm gonna be willing to work more with it. But I don't really call myself, I don't really refer to myself as an editorial agent, just because I look for books that you can start shopping pretty quickly. But to answer your question, I think when it comes to proposals, we do about 4 rounds of edits on that. It just really depends on the project, but it's usually around 4, and then probably close to 4 as well when it comes to the first few chapters that I do some deep line edits with.
And this is why writers will hear other writers who've been through this process say, I just couldn't stand to look at it again, because you've gone through all your edits, and then you go through all the edits with the agent, and then you get it with an editor, and the editor looks at it and says, okay, we're going to do these edits. And it's just interesting to hear what, and I've gotten a variance of answers on that one, but it does seem to fall more in the 3 to 4 rounds of edits with the agent.
Yeah, I mean, and when it comes to editing, it is, again, very preference based. And so even once a publisher signs it, just because an agent's helped with some edits, that publisher could change everything. So you never really know. I think writers, they have to hold, if you want to be a successful author, like as a writer, you have to hold your project with loose hands, to where you have to kind of see the vision, you have to be passionate about what you're doing, but understand that there are going to be some changes the writer's going to have to make if they want to work with certain publishers. And so it's just a part of the process. And yes, I don't think I've ever met a writer who's reached the end of the editing process with a publisher and I still want to be reading I still wanted to read their book. Usually they're like, please get this away from me. By the end of that, but yeah.
And then to wrap out the agent section of this, remind people what kind of work you represent.
So I'm a generalist. I represent everything from children's books to nonfiction. Right now, I'm not heavily acquiring memoirs, and I'm being very selective with picture books. But I love YA, I love middle grade, I love any smart, high concept, adult fiction. Kind of on my wish list right now is I'm looking for a lot more nonfiction, especially if it's anything self-help. I'm looking for a lot more of that. And really any YA project that I can fall in love with, because I need more YA on my list.
All right, so let's talk to author Caroline now. I know you're very excited about that. First of all, I mean, now you had 3 books that were published beforehand, but last year you got a 3-book deal with TNZ Fiction, which is an imprint of HarperCollins. So first and foremost, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes, that's a huge accomplishment.
It was. It's taken a long time. When I meet with people, and they hear I'm an agent, they hear I'm a writer, they usually think, oh, because you're an agent, that must have gotten you that deal. And that's not how the industry works. I mean, it doesn't matter what job you have in publishing, you have to go through the system like everyone else. There's no shortcuts in publishing. And so this deal took about, I think it was like 7-8 years that I've been pursuing a career like in the traditional publishing realm. And so it's taken that long for my own writing career. And so I think that's important for every writer to know. It's just you have to go through the same process as everyone else. There's a lot of growing. There's a lot of seasons where you have to maybe shelf a project and work on platform, or really rewrite a project, or go to the conferences and do these different things to network. And so it's a step-by-step process. It takes a long time, but I think it's important to kind of fall in love with the journey, because you're going to be kind of in the waiting process a lot more than you'll be the not waiting process.
Yeah, and that scary word of networking is the one that I throw at writers a lot. I try to use it as little as possible, because I know it
it's a horrible word.
It requires socializing, and we know how we feel about that. But I mean, that's really one of the biggest parts of the game, and really the only advantage that you may have, or that I may have as organizer of a writing organization, is that we just have more people we're in contact with, but we still have to talk to them. We still have to get to know them, and we still have to talk about our ideas just like any other writer. So it doesn't.
And networking is a scary word, because networking implies this ulterior motive, and it's just scary because everyone's like, oh, I don't know. It's like you go into a relationship thinking, okay, how am I going to use you? And it's horrible. So I mean, at conferences, I would just encourage people to, if they've come to a conference and they're a writer, talk to other writers, make friends, because authentic relationships always win out. And you never know, the person you're sitting next to at a conference, they might be the best-selling author that might be able to help you, and it will be an organic, like authentic relationship. And so I think just building real connection first, and some of that kind of can strip away the fear of networking, because I don't like to network. I just like to talk to people.
Yeah.
So I think just having a less stressful approach can really help, but just being friendly, being kind to everyone, don't burn bridges.
Right.
I have I remember I went to a conference in New York one time, and I noticed that the writers would not talk to each other. They would only talk to faculty members. And it was heartbreaking because I knew that, okay, the people who you're ignoring could be the ones to, engage with you on social media, or to leave reviews for your books, because writers understand the value of those things.
Right.
And so I think it's important just to be kind to people, not to burn bridges, and just kind of see where that takes you.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I assume Dear Josephine is the first book you have coming out on this deal, and I assume it's still on schedule to come out. I saw February of next year.
Yep, we haven't had any issues with that yet, so hopefully.
Well, yeah, that's first of all, that's awesome. And then now this book is, if I read correctly, you took a 19th century story styling, but mixed it with modern communication of like emails and texting, things like that. So, I mean, first,
Yeah.
what does that look like? Secondly, how did you come upon that?
I did not think HarperCollins would sign this idea. The whole process that kind of led up to me signing the contract with HarperCollins, they liked a book that I had written. It was a YA action comedy. They took it to pub board. It passed. I got on the phone with them, and they were talking about like big picture, where I wanted to go with my writing career. And I pretty much told them that I didn't want to be known for writing this like action comedy thing. And so they said, okay, well, pitch us your other ideas. I think I pitched a total of 11 books before they even picked one. And they picked a book that was originally a women's fiction novel that I had just kind of converted it into a YA book. And I thought, never in a million years will they pick this book, because it's outlandish. No way. And that's the one they signed. So they titled it Dearest Josephine. And part of the book has this like Regency era feel. It's written in that 19th century style. There's a whole other like narrative that's written in this letter format, almost like Mr. Darcy's writing to you. And there's a whole narrative that's emails and texts. So the kind of original idea for the format, when I came up with this idea, I saw it in my head and I was like, okay, this is the story I want to tell, but how in the world am I going to tell the story in a way that makes sense? And I had just finished reading the Guernsey Literary and Potato Pie Society, which is all told through like letters and telegrams and things like that. So I thought, okay, I've never written an epistolary style anything, but maybe this is going to be the way to tell the story. And I wrote it, I pitched it again to Harper, and they loved it. I'm like, this is insane. Who's going to like this book? But it ended up somehow working. It's come together, and I think it's become a love letter to the written word, just because we communicate in so many different ways, and even our texts tell a story, even our emails tell a story, the letters, everything we write down kind of does connect to tell this bigger story. So as I've been going through over the last few months and doing kind of a big content revision on it, which I finished finally a few weeks ago, and so grateful to turn that in. Those are some long work days, but I think that it's kind of come together, and it's become this love letter to the written word. But that's kind of the basic gist of how it came together. I still can't believe that it was the one that was picked. It was the hardest thing I've ever written. And funnily enough, the next book I'm writing is probably going to be harder. So I don't know why I do this to myself. They just progressively get more intense.
Yes, I understand and can relate to that. No, it's a YA novel, you said?
Yes, it's YA now.
All right. So you may not have enough on your list, but at least you're writing it. So there we go.
Yeah.
So you as a writer, what do you value more? Do you value storytelling, or do you value the mechanics of writing?
I would have to say storytelling. I think writing for me became a means to tell my story. Even when I was a kid, I loved stories first and foremost. Kind of to a point where I was just this weird little kid running around in costumes, like talking to characters that didn't exist. Like that was me as a kid. I love stories, and so learning how to tell a story, it really was that means of just starting to share kind of the stories that I had. But I think over time, the mechanics of writing became more and more important, because I think to tell an effective story, you have to understand how to write, how to be able to convey emotion, how to get people to care about the story you're telling. But I think looking at those two options, I think storytelling would be the first thing. Personally, I find that learning how to write, I think someone can learn how to write just by reading, by studying other stories to see what's effective, what's not effective, the trial and error. Some things with writing can be taught. I think a lot of it is just putting pen to paper and just seeing what works.
Yeah. I have a couple questions left before I grill you with the lightning round.
Oh
no! So there's this phrase that writers use, and it's very common, I think, in any kind of artistic field, and it's called imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
It's this idea that you aren't good enough or you don't belong, and it's basically just the personalization of doubt. Now,
Yeah.
Any writer going through a journey of rejection and struggle and trying to find the right story goes through this. Now, I'm just going to assume that you've been through it, because I feel like we all have. Yeah. So, how did you cope with that?
Well, I mean, I think I don't think it ever truly goes away. I don't think I've ever talked to a writer who has felt, yes, I belong here. I've earned this spot at the table. Like I fit here. And in writing, I think it's difficult as well, because writing is such an isolated process. It's between you and the page. But when it gets to that point of trying to share your work, it's like you're suddenly exposed to this criticism. When you go to writing conferences, you're surrounded by people who are all pursuing a similar dream. I like to call it the achiever vest. In my head, I picture like a Girl Scout vest covered in patches. And I think, when we go to these different events, or when we network with other writers, it's almost like we want to put on our vest and show off our credentials, which can kind of create this sense of imposter syndrome. We're like, oh, he's done this, he's written for this, or she's done this, and do I really have a place here? And I remember something that my friend's mom said to me when I was first getting started. She said, someone has to do it, why can't it be you? And that's always pushed me forward, thinking, okay, if someone has to have a career in this, if someone has to be successful, why can't it be me? And why can't it be you? And so, I mean, even now when I go to conferences and I sit on panels with big authors, I get that sense of, do I belong here? Am I faking my way? Am I faking a spot here? And I just remember that, I have a spot at the table. Maybe it's not something that is always earned, but it's a privilege and it's a blessing. And so I think even now, just reminding myself that just because I'm not where I want to be long-term doesn't mean that I don't belong here. And I even think I saw this on social media, but it was a quote that said, you can't compare someone else's middle to your beginning, or you can't compare someone else's ending to your middle. I mean, we're all in different stages of this process of pursuing this dream. We're all doing this together, even if we might be in different stages of it. And so I think keeping that in mind is really important. And even going, even trying is such a big step. There are so many writers who I'm acquainted with who refuse to pursue publishing because they're afraid that they don't belong, or they're afraid of what people are going to say. And so even taking any of those steps, even watching this video, it's still taking a step kind of on that timeline or on that journey of landing the pub deal or pursuing that author career. So I know that's not an exact answer, but I think it is. It's a mental game. It's a mental struggle that never truly goes away. I just think you create more peace with it, and you just kind of gain more confidence of, hey, I might always feel like I belong here, but I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I still believe in the calling.
Yeah, and this goes back to the conference thing, and one of the reasons why I recommend writers go so often is we get stuck in our heads. We think we're the only one going through this journey, and you get to a conference and you find out that you have people, you have others who are going through it, and people you can talk to about this and share your
get it. You don't think you're crazy.
Yeah, and you get to see authors who have succeeded sitting up there talking about how they still experience doubt and they still struggle with that kind of thing. So. All right, so you mentioned the word career, and I feel like everybody has a little secret that they hide about themselves behind, and apparently you had this dream of an alternate career and a British baking show.
My impossible dream. It's impossible because I'm not British, and so it's just it doesn't make. It's a small detail. My ancestors were but I don't have the cute accent, so they're not going to let me on their Great British Baking Show. But I do. I love the show. It's gotten me to bake more. I fell in love with it a few years ago. It's one of the most peaceful things, but that's one of my impossible dreams that will never happen. But I can still dream, right? I also want to be a stand-up comedian, even if it's just for one night only. Want to do that. I was a DJ for one night only, so I can check that off my bucket list. But hey, I mean, if writing always seemed like an impossible dream, and look at where we are. So just because something seems unlikely doesn't mean it's always going to be impossible. So I'm gonna still hope. I'm still gonna hope. Maybe one day you'll see me on the Great British Baking Show.
I think as long as you perfect sponge, you should be.
Oh
okay.
yeah,
It's sponge. Yeah. I don't know what else you would
Bakers,
say.
5 minutes. Fuel stations, bakers.
All right, so we've got a couple minutes left, and I'm going to run you through a set of questions here. We just want quick answers, and then I will release you to your day. We ready?
I think so. I'm having an anxiety attack. Let's go.
What was your favorite book as a child?
Peter Pan.
What is your favorite character ever?
Oh, Alex Rider just popped into my head, and I didn't know if that was truth, but that just happened. So
that was in your head. Name a book that you think more people should be aware of.
Warm Bodies by Isaac Marion.
Oh, you're doing it. We mentioned Twilight earlier, and I wasn't anticipating that this was going to actually be relevant, but Edward, Jacob, or a sack of potatoes?
Sack of potatoes.
Thank you. The Sorting Hat is about to land on your head. What do you want it to say?
What hat?
The Sorting Hat.
I don't even know what that is, so I'd ask, what are you? That's probably I wanted to tell me what it is.
So Hogwarts, Harry Potter?
I've never seen Harry Potter or read the books, and so every writer just turned off this video right now.
Yeah, I think I may have to end the interview.
Okay, yeah, it's okay.
I'm just joking. All right.
I had a cringy experience with Harry Potter one time, and it ruined it for me. One day I'll tell you about it.
Okay, well, I look forward to hearing that. Well, then let's go to something a little more realistic.
Okay.
A person you'd most like to be stranded on a desert island with?
Oh, Jake Gyllenhaal.
Oh, okay, that's good.
I don't know why, that just popped in my head. We're going to go with that.
What is your favorite series of books?
Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay.
What's the one food you cannot do without?
Can we just say coffee as a food? Because I feel like
coffee's a food to me.
I eat, drink, and breathe coffee, so we'll just say coffee.
Sticking with food, the food most likely to spoil in your refrigerator.
Probably yogurt. I don't really eat a lot of yogurt. Or mustard.
People buy it. People buy it but don't eat it, so that's perfectly reasonable.
I feel like that's a thing. Okay, yogurt.
Right. Carousel or roller coaster?
Roller coaster.
And the thing you want to do first when we get back to whatever normal is?
I'm going to England to get on the Great British Baking Show.
There you go. You're going to run into the right people.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, that's it. You survived.
I did it.
You failed the Harry Potter part, but you're too fun to talk to, and we like you too much to stick on that for too long. But
Perfect.
I look forward to hearing whatever the traumatic event was.
Okay. It's great talking to you. Thank you so much for having me on this interview.
Yeah, absolutely. So stay safe, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye. The 5th Annual Broadleaf Writers Conference is scheduled for October 17th and 18th of this year at the Cobb Galleria. Open registration begins June 1st, and we will have the schedule of programming available before then. If you are interested in more information on the 5th Annual Broadleaf Writers Conference, just visit broadleafwriters.com and go to the 5th Annual Broadleaf Writers Conference tab, where you'll find a list of speakers, some of the programming we're doing, and any information you may require on travel arrangements or hotels or any of that nature. But if you have any questions beyond that, feel free to reach out, and we hope that we will see you there.